The Winchester Mystery House is not just a building, it is a legend carved into wood, glass, and stone, a monument to grief, superstition, and endless construction. When people hear the name, they imagine winding staircases that lead nowhere, doors that open into walls, windows placed in impossible spots, and hallways that seem to go on forever without purpose. But behind this bizarre and fascinating structure lies the story of a woman haunted by tragedy, by loss, and by the ghosts of the countless lives claimed by the weapon that carried her family's name. To understand the Winchester Mystery House, one must first understand Sarah Winchester herself, because this mansion is less of a home and more of an external expression of her inner torment. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, into a well-to-do family. She was educated, intelligent, and spoke several languages, an uncommon achievement for a woman of her time. Known for her petite stature, refined manners, and striking beauty, she was admired in social circles. But her fate would change when she married William Wirt Winchester, the only son of Oliver Winchester, who owned the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. This company was about to become one of the most famous arms manufacturers in the world, responsible for producing the Winchester rifle, a weapon that would be called the gun that won the West. The Winchester rifle was not just a gun. It was a symbol of American expansion, conquest, and the bloody wars against Native Americans. It was a weapon that saw action in the Civil War, in countless skirmishes across the frontier, and in battles that shaped the United States as it expanded westward. It made the Winchester family enormously wealthy. With wealth came prestige, and Sarah Winchester, married into this dynasty, should have lived a life of privilege and luxury. But life had a cruel way of showing her a different path. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to her first and only child, a daughter named Annie. Tragically, Annie was born with a rare disease called marasmus, a condition that prevented her body from absorbing nutrients. Just 6 weeks after her birth, Annie died in her mother's arms. Sarah was devastated. She withdrew from society, consumed by grief. And though time passed, her wounds never healed. 17 years later, in 1881, her husband William also died from tuberculosis, leaving Sarah a widow. In the span of her life, she had lost her daughter, her husband, and her sense of stability. Now she was one of the richest women in America, inheriting millions of dollars and nearly half the shares in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, which gave her an income of about $1,000 a day, an astronomical sum at the time, but all the money in the world could not ease her sorrow. Her grief transformed into something darker, a belief that her family was cursed. She came to believe that she was being haunted by the ghosts of those killed by Winchester rifles. Stories say she consulted a spiritual medium in Boston who told her the spirits were indeed real and that she needed to find a way to appease them. The medium reportedly advised her to move west, away from New Haven, and build a house for herself and for the spirits. But this house had to be built continuously, day and night, without end. If construction ever stopped, the spirits would claim her life. And so Sarah Winchester moved to California, and in 1884 purchased a modest 8-room farmhouse in the Santa Clara Valley. What happened next would become one of the strangest episodes in American history. With her immense fortune, Sarah hired crews of carpenters, craftsmen, and laborers, and construction began. But this was not ordinary construction. There were no blueprints, no master plan. Instead, Sarah herself would give instructions each day, sometimes scribbling them on scraps of paper, telling the workers to add a room here, a hallway there, a staircase in the corner. Work continued around the clock, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it did not stop. For the next 38 years, until the day Sarah Winchester died, construction never ceased. The result was the sprawling, bizarre mansion now known as the Winchester Mystery House. What began as a small farmhouse grew into a labyrinth of over 160 rooms, more than 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 47 fireplaces, and miles of hallways. But what made it truly strange were the oddities and architectural curiosities. There were staircases that went up to ceilings and ended abruptly, doors that opened into brick walls, windows that looked into other rooms instead of outside, and passageways that twisted and turned without reason. Some doors opened to sudden drops where stepping through would send someone falling to the ground 2 stories below. Some staircases were built with extremely shallow steps, designed perhaps for Sarah's arthritis, but also adding to the surreal quality of the house. People wondered, why did she build such a house? Was she truly trying to confuse spirits, creating a maze to keep them lost within the walls? Was she experimenting with design? Or was it simply the product of a troubled mind haunted by guilt and grief? Sarah herself never gave clear answers. She lived quietly within the mansion, dressed in black, shunning society and communicating with her staff mostly through notes. At night she would wander the hallways, sometimes entering the séance room, a special chamber in the house where she was believed to commune with spirits. Legend has it that she would ring a bell at midnight to call the spirits, and again, at 2 a.m. to dismiss them. The house became not just her residence but a living entity, always growing, always changing, never complete. The mansion also reflected Sarah's deep interest in spiritualism, numerology, and symbolism. The number 13 appears repeatedly throughout the house. Staircases with 13 steps, windows with 13 panes, chandeliers modified to hold 13 candles. Spiderweb motifs were also common, carved into windows and woodwork, perhaps as symbols of protection. Every detail seemed infused with hidden meaning, as if the house itself were a giant puzzle designed to keep restless souls at bay. For the workers, life at the mansion was steady and unusual. They were paid well and worked continuously, but unlike ordinary construction projects, there was no completion date, no clear design to follow. Sarah's orders could change suddenly. A wing might be built one year and torn down the next. Walls would be erected and then demolished, replaced by new ones at odd angles. It was as if the house itself was in constant motion, evolving according to Sarah's nightly instructions. Outsiders began to whisper about the eccentric widow who lived in her endless mansion. Newspapers called it a haunted house. Locals were both fascinated and frightened by the strange construction. Some believed Sarah was insane, consumed by paranoia and grief. Others thought she was a genius, creating a unique architectural masterpiece. But whatever people thought, one fact remained. The house grew larger and stranger with each passing year. By the time of Sarah Winchester's death in 1922, the house had grown into a sprawling, bizarre mansion with 24,000 square feet of floor space, more than 40 staircases, and countless oddities. Construction stopped immediately upon her death, and workers simply laid down their tools and walked away. The house, frozen in its unfinished state, became a time capsule of Sarah's obsession. After her death, the house was open to the public, and it quickly became one of California's strangest tourist attractions. Visitors marveled at the maze-like design, the endless rooms, the staircases that went nowhere. Ghost stories grew around the mansion. People claimed to hear footsteps in empty halls, feel cold drafts where no windows existed, and see shadowy figures moving across rooms. Paranormal investigators have long been fascinated by the Winchester Mystery House, calling it one of the most haunted places in America. But beyond the ghost stories, the mansion tells a deeper story about grief, guilt, and the human need for meaning. Sarah Winchester, surrounded by tragedy, chose to spend her life building, always building, as if by creating she could keep death at bay. The house became her obsession, her refuge, and perhaps her punishment. Some believe she was trying to atone for the bloodshed caused by her family's rifles. Others think she was simply a lonely woman clinging to the only thing she could control. Whatever the truth, the Winchester Mystery House remains a physical manifestation of her inner world, an architectural labyrinth born of sorrow and superstition. Today, the house stands in San Jose, California, preserved as a National Historic Landmark. Thousands of visitors walk its halls every year, retracing Sarah's steps, marveling at the strangeness of its design. It is a reminder of the thin line between genius and madness, between belief and delusion, between grief and obsession. Standing in one of its endless hallways, one cannot help but feel the weight of history, the presence of a woman who spent nearly 4 decades building a house for the dead. The Winchester Mystery House is not just America's strangest mansion. It is a story about a woman who turned her pain into architecture, her sorrow into staircases, and her fear into walls. It is a story that continues to fascinate and haunt, nearly a century after Sarah Winchester's death. And as long as the house stands, its mystery will endure, inviting each visitor to wander its halls and wonder about the woman who built a mansion to keep the ghosts at bay. When people walk into the Winchester Mystery House today, the first thing they feel is disorientation. The house seems to have no clear beginning and no clear end. You may step through one doorway and suddenly find yourself in a corridor that turns back upon itself. You may climb a staircase that rises only a few steps before flattening into a ceiling. There are windows that look not outside to the garden, but into other rooms, as though the house is peering at itself. To many visitors, this strangeness is fascinating. To Sarah Winchester, it was protection. For her, every wall, every stair, every hallway was built with purpose, even if no one else could see it. She was building not just a house, but a defense, a maze to trap restless spirits and confuse the dead. Inside the house, the details reveal Sarah's peculiar mind. The stained glass windows were not ordinary designs. Some contained quotes from Shakespeare. Others showed mysterious symbols like spider webs and suns. The famous Tiffany company is said to have crafted some of the glasswork at great expense. Yet some windows were installed in places where no sunlight could ever pass through them. One exquisite stained glass window worth a fortune was placed in an interior wall where it remained forever dark. It was as if beauty mattered less than the placement, as though Sarah wanted the house itself to hold secrets known only to her. Another striking feature was her obsession with the number 13. Nearly every part of the house contains it in some form. There are chandeliers with 13 candles, staircases with 13 steps, walls with 13 panels, closets with 13 hooks. Even her will was divided into 13 sections. Some have speculated that the number was symbolic for her, representing spiritual protection, while others think it was simply part of her eccentricity. Whatever the case, 13 became a rhythm, a heartbeat running through the mansion's veins. The séance room was perhaps the most mysterious place of all. Tucked away within the heart of the mansion, it was a small, private chamber with a single entrance and multiple false doors. This room was where Sarah was believed to communicate with spirits. According to legend, each night she would enter the room, kneel before a table with a board or candles, and ask the ghosts for guidance on how to continue construction. She did not build according to architectural plans, but according to whispers from beyond the grave. Once she received her instructions, she would leave a note for the carpenters, telling them what to build next. Some stories even claim she had a special bell tower constructed so that at midnight she could ring the bell to summon spirits and then ring it again at 2 o'clock to dismiss them. The neighbors said they sometimes heard the bells in the dead of night, and though the bells themselves were later removed, the legend lived on. The workers at the house rarely questioned her orders. They simply built, tore down, and rebuilt whatever Sarah demanded. They were paid generously, and in a time when steady work was rare, few complained about the eccentricity of their employer. But the scale of construction was astonishing. The house eventually grew to cover 6 acres of land. It had over 24,000 square feet of floor space. At its peak, it contained 500 to 600 rooms, although after the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake, many of the rooms were damaged or sealed off, leaving the final count at about 160 rooms. There were 47 fireplaces, 17 chimneys, 2 basements, 3 elevators, and miles of twisting hallways. It was a house that defied logic, a house that seemed to grow like a living organism, guided by the hand of a woman who spoke to ghosts. The earthquake of 1906 was a turning point. When it struck, the Winchester house was badly shaken. The front of the mansion, a grand 7-story tower, collapsed. Sarah herself was trapped for hours inside one of her bedrooms until workers freed her. Many rooms were damaged, and some were boarded up permanently. Rather than demolish the house or repair it fully, Sarah chose to leave much of the destruction as it was, as though even the earthquake was part of the mansion's story. Today, visitors can still see doors that open into nothing, staircases cut off mid-flight, and rooms sealed behind walls. For Sarah, the earthquake was also a sign from the spirits. Some believe she thought the collapse happened because she had spent too much time expanding upward. So afterward, she focused on building outward instead. The mansion became wider, more sprawling, more maze-like, until it covered more land horizontally than vertically. Each new addition was different from the last, sometimes in style, sometimes in scale. One room might have elegant Victorian trim, while another might look hastily constructed with mismatched wood and awkward corners. It was as though the mansion carried the marks of its constant evolution, a patchwork quilt of architecture stitched together by superstition. The staff who worked for Sarah described her as both kind and secretive. She was generous with pay and provided steady work, but she was also intensely private. She communicated by slipping notes under doors or leaving written instructions. She often wore a dark black veil, even indoors, and rarely entertained visitors. Servants reported that she would change bedrooms often, never sleeping in the same room 2 nights in a row. This, too, was believed to be part of her effort to evade spirits, never letting them know where she rested. But despite her reclusive life, the townspeople around San Jose could not ignore the massive project that loomed at the edge of their community. The ever-growing house, with its scaffolding, hammering, and constant noise, became a source of gossip and speculation. Rumors spread that Sarah Winchester was mad, cursed, or perhaps even a witch. Some newspapers mocked her, while others treated her with a mixture of pity and fascination. The house became famous even before her death as the house built by spirits, yet Sarah never tried to explain herself. She left no journals, no interviews, no clear testimony about why she built the house as she did. All that remains are the legends passed down by workers and neighbors, and the house itself as a silent witness. After her death in 1922, the house was found to contain entire rooms that had been locked up, filled with valuable furniture, antiques, and art that had never been used. Her will, divided into 13 parts, instructed that her estate be given largely to charities and to her niece, but the house itself was considered worthless due to its bizarre design. Within months, it was opened as a tourist attraction, and it has remained one ever since. Over the decades, the Winchester Mystery House became one of California's most visited and most talked about landmarks. People came not just for the architecture, but for the ghost stories. Tour guides reported hearing footsteps when no one was present, doors closing by themselves, and voices echoing in empty rooms. Some visitors claimed to feel cold hands on their shoulders, or to see figures at the end of hallways that vanished when approached. Paranormal investigators have long considered it one of the most haunted places in America. One of the most famous ghost stories involves the wheelbarrow ghost, a spirit said to be that of a worker who once cared for the house. Visitors claim to see a spectral man carrying tools, pushing a wheelbarrow through the basement. Another tale speaks of the shadow in the hall, a figure that appears at the corner of one's eye but disappears when turned to face directly. Guides often talk about rooms where cameras fail to work properly, or where sudden cold drafts pass even on warm days. Skeptics argue that the ghost stories are just stories, and that the strangeness of the house itself creates an atmosphere where people's imaginations run wild. They point out that the odd design, staircases to nowhere, doors to sudden drops, rooms sealed off, naturally confuses and unsettles visitors, making them more prone to feeling fear. But whether or not ghosts are real, the house undeniably has an energy that makes it unforgettable. Architectural historians have studied the mansion for decades, trying to understand its design. Some believe Sarah may not have been entirely irrational. The shallow, easy riser staircases, for example, may have been built for her health, since she suffered from arthritis. The multiple fireplaces and chimneys were not just strange, they also helped heat such a massive structure. Even the constant building may have been her way of coping with grief, keeping her mind occupied and giving her purpose. Perhaps the house was less about spirits and more about therapy, an endless project that gave a broken woman a reason to continue living. Still, the fact remains that the house makes no sense as a normal home. Hallways twist back upon themselves. Some rooms have no doors, and some doors open into walls. One second-floor door opens outward into open space, where stepping through would mean a deadly fall into the garden below. Staircases rise and stop abruptly, forcing visitors to turn back. Some windows are set in floors, others in ceilings. Pipes lead nowhere. Chimneys stop short of the roof, and cupboards open into blank walls. The mansion defies logic, a labyrinth, without an exit. To this day, no one knows how many rooms the house truly has. Some say 160, others say more. But the layout is so confusing that even modern surveys disagree. It is possible that hidden rooms remain undiscovered, sealed away behind walls, waiting to be found. The idea that the house itself is still hiding secrets makes it even more mysterious. For Sarah Winchester, though, the mansion was her life's work. She devoted nearly 4 decades to it, pouring her fortune into wood, glass, and stone. She never